Hey everyone, and welcome to WDIM News, my weekly podcast where I talk about sci-fi stuff and some other stuff. My name is Eric. Thank you very much for joining me. This week, among other things, we're going to take a nice long look at the upcoming second season of Star Trek Strange New Worlds, which is now less than a month away. In fact, just last week, a trailer was released online that apparently showed a bit too much and was quickly removed by Paramount. But the internet is forever, and I do have that information to share, along with some interesting details about each episode next season without going into any spoilers. Then, I'm going to take a look at the current state of Star Trek besides Strange New Worlds and give you updates on all the projects, including those that may have been affected by the writer's strike. Many shows are worried if they will even get another season because of this strike, but I think that there is one Star Trek series that is on the bubble which may actually be saved by the writer's strike, which I would like to discuss. Then before I sign off, I want to talk about a few other bits of news, including the newly announced Babylon 5 film and the demise of one of the most popular streaming services on the market today. But before I get into all this, I just want to say thank you for clicking on this podcast. I also want to apologize for not getting out a new one last week, which was the first week that I had not put out a new podcast since starting WDIM News. If you'd like to know why, I posted a message about it on my community page. Make sure that you are subscribed so that you do not miss out on any new podcast or video. And please remember to hit that like button as well. So first, let's talk about Season 2 of Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, you may have heard this already, but last week there was a promo for Strange New Worlds put out by Crave Online that was quickly removed by Paramount. The reason being is that there is a scene in it that I actually saw before it was removed that shows Spock, played by Ethan Peck, giving the Vulcan salute, and then they pan to the transporter room and you see Captain Pike and La'an, and behind them are Tawny Newsome and Jack Quaid as Beckett Mariner and Brad Boimler. So this is a scene from the upcoming crossover episode, and it shows the animated characters in live action form from Star Trek Lower Decks. So the scene really is just a second long, and you could just see them standing behind Pike and La'an, and Boimler seems to be holding some sort of device, and they're in the same uniforms that they are wearing on the animated series. If you've never seen the animated series, the uniform kind of sort of looks like an evolution of the uniform that we saw Picard and Raffi wear in like flashback sequences during the first season of Picard. I don't know if you remember that, but it kind of looks like an evolution or a de-evolution of that, like maybe it came before it. So really that's all you see. You just see those two characters standing behind the characters from Strange New Worlds, and then you just blink out of it. So it really doesn't show that much. I'm kind of surprised as to why they would have taken it down, because they obviously greenlit it at some point for Crave to have it to use. And it's not like we haven't seen Tawny Newsome and Jack Quaid before. From what I could tell from the still that was saved from that scene, it doesn't even look like Jack Quaid has purple hair like Brad Boimler has on Lower Decks. So I'm not sure why they did remove that trailer. It kind of reminds me of when there was a big deal about Pedro Pascal removing his helmet during the first season of The Mandalorian. And then when he did, it was just like, oh, there's Pedro Pascal. Why is that a big deal? You know, I know that behind the scenes, it's a big deal. There was a story that came out that Pedro Pascal had to remove his helmet because if he didn't remove his helmet during the first season of The Mandalorian, Disney could have just paid him as a voice actor and not a live actor, which obviously would have made him a lot less money. So that's why Pedro Pascal has to show his face, and all the other Mandalorians seem to show their face at one point or another. But anyway, back to Star Trek. So I think that it is interesting that they pulled that trailer so quickly when it really didn't show that much. Maybe they are going to add something in CGI to Jack Quaid's hair and make it more purple. I don't know why they would remove it, because like I said, we know what Tawny Newsome and Jack Quaid look like. So seeing like Brad Boimler and Beckett Mariner in live action, it's cool to see, but it's not like, oh my God, that's a big reveal. Look at her hair. Like it's Tawny Newsome. If you've ever seen Tawny Newsome, you know what she looks like. So I just think it was a little weird that they took it down, but we did get a brief glimpse of what the Lower Decks characters will look like on Strange New Worlds. Now, besides that, we do know a few other things that are happening in the second season. And now we have the 10 episode titles. I'm going to break down each episode title. These episode titles have not been released officially, but they do come from Nick from Sci Fanatics, and he's usually pretty right on about this stuff. So I'm going to go over them. If there is a change later on, you'll know why. Like I said, these aren't official. Let me know in the comments if these seem right to you. So the first episode of the second season is reportedly titled The Broken Circle. Now, in my opinion, this episode has to do with number one and the fallout of her being taken by Starfleet at the end of season one. I mean, you can't just leave that out there or, solve it through exposition. I would think that we would actually see what happens to bring number one, Una Chin-Riley, played by Rebecca Romaine, back onto the Enterprise. And from the title, The Broken Circle, it kind of makes me think of, break the cycle, break the cycle of violence. So maybe we're going to see how Starfleet broke the cycle of violence on some culture or something like that. And we're going to see the effect of that, the after effect. A lot of Star Trek Picard was dealing with the ramifications of some of the things that the Next Generation crew did during their time on the Enterprise D&E, and not all of them were positive. So this could be another example of how maybe the Prime Directive failed and they were trying, the Starfleet or the crew of the Enterprise were trying to break the cycle. And the fact that the episode is titled The Broken Circle may be kind of ominous, like maybe that didn't work out so well for whoever they were trying to help. So that leads me to believe that this episode will deal with one of those or both of those things. The next episode is titled Ad Astra per Aspera. And this is a Latin phrase. There have been quite a few Latin phrases lately in Star Trek. Last season on Picard, we saw the return of Locutus, and then his son was given the name Vox. Both of those are Latin terms. And this phrase in particular, Ad Astra per Aspera, will translate to the stars through difficulties. So again, this could be another culture getting help by Starfleet, or a culture that maybe just made first contact with Starfleet. They just made it to the stars and somehow Starfleet is helping them out. Again, this is Strange New Worlds, so we're going to be seeing probably new cultures, new planets every single week. That's kind of the modus operandi for this. Oh, there was some more, and for some more Latin for you. I didn't even mean to do that. That's what this show is about, going to different locations every week. And it looks like they're going to keep doing that this season. So this second episode, To the Stars Through Difficulties, like I said, probably means that we're going to see some culture that has just gotten warp drive or just made contact with Starfleet, and the Enterprise is helping them out. This next episode looks really interesting for a lot of reasons. And the reported title is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So the first thing I thought of when I heard that is that this is probably the time travel episode concerning Kirk and La'an. There were some pictures that were leaked to the public of the filming of this season of Strange New Worlds, and we saw Paul Wesley as Kirk and Christina Chong as La'an filming in a very modern looking setting. Modern to our times. I don't mean modern, like Star Trek modern. It looked like they were outside, at a mall or something. And I believe that this will be the episode where we see Kirk and La'an in this time travel adventure. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow also has a tie to Shakespeare, and we know how much Star Trek loves to use Shakespeare. This phrase in particular has a tie to Macbeth, and is supposed to be about first chances and second chances, fleeting chances and only chances, and the fear that time is running out. So again, a lot of allusions to time travel. So I fully believe that this will be the episode we see Kirk and La'an go back in time. The title also possibly has a connection to an original series episode titled All Our Yesterdays, which is also taken from Macbeth. In that episode, which was in the third season of the show, it involved Kirk, Spock, and McCoy time traveling through an alien planet's past. And they were split up. They weren't all together. They were at different points of this planet's past. So we could be seeing that. And we already saw in the official trailer for Strange New Worlds, that Kirk and La'an will be on some kind of time travel adventure that looks to be taking place in the late 20th or early 21st century. And I said during my trailer breakdown that I really, really hope it's the 90s and that we possibly see La'an's ancestor, Khan Noonien Singh, in action, in live action in the 90s when he was supposed to be alive before he was frozen and sent off in space. So I really hope we have some kind of connection here in this episode. If you remember, in the second season of Picard, there was a little hint towards Khan in the last episode. So maybe this is all going to tie together somehow, and we are going to see the actual Khan Noonien Singh before he becomes Ricardo Montalban So I'm really excited for this one in particular. The next episode, episode 4, is reportedly titled Among the Lotus Eaters. Now, I had to look up what a lotus eater was. I had no idea. But so Lotus Eaters comes from a 19th century poem. And what it is a lotus eater is supposedly a person who spends their time indulging in pleasure and luxury rather than dealing with practical concerns. So kind of the opposite of Starfleet. Like Starfleet is all about not indulging themselves in pleasure and just, concentrating on bettering themselves and bettering humanity. So I believe that this episode may have something to do with Risa or a pleasure planet. We've had a couple of episodes throughout Star Trek where they deal with like these planets where everybody's doing it all the time and running it around half naked. And, they'll kill you if you throw your basketball in the wrong place. But most of the time, they're actually pretty cool. So I know Risa has a weird history. Like at one time, the planet was not hospitable and somebody came along and installed environmental controls and made it like a perfect planet. So maybe we'll be seeing some kind of history of Risa in this episode, but I think this will be a fun episode and kind of probably a palate cleanser after the third episode, which will probably be heavy on nostalgia and heavy on, Star Trek lore and stuff like that. Episode 4 will probably just be a lot of fun and probably a lot of laughs. Speaking of that, the fifth episode title is reportedly Charades or Charades, depending on how you pronounce it. But the only thing I could think of with a name like Charades, like maybe this episode has something to do with the crew not being able to speak to each other. So they have to like use sign language, like the game Charades. I don't know if you've ever played that game, but maybe maybe that's like too literal for the title. It has nothing to do with it, but that's the first thing I thought of. Because Strange New Worlds has already done some fun stuff. They had that episode in the first season where most of the crew were transported to like a fairyland tale and they were all different characters and stuff like that. So I think they're going to double down on some of that stuff this season. And we could see some of that stuff like that in an episode like Charades. The next episode, episode 6, is reportedly titled Lost in Translation. Now, either we're going to see the debut of Scarlett Johansson in the world of Star Trek, or this is going to be an Uhura episode. I mean, the episode title is Lost in Translation. Uhura can translate like 30 something alien languages. So I'm sure that this will be a focus on Uhura. I'm guessing that we're actually going to get a lot more focus on Uhura in the second season, because in the first season, it was kind of played off like, will she, won't she be on the Enterprise? Even though we as Star Trek fans know she ends up on the Enterprise. But the first season, she was just a cadet. And now I think she'll be a full officer on the bridge. But I'm guessing that this will be a look at Uhura. From the season 2 trailer, I picked out, there was a scene where it looked like Uhura was looking at a crashed shuttlecraft. And we know from her past that her parents died in a shuttlecraft accident. So this could be a look into her past specifically and, that kind of trauma that she kind of discussed in the first season. The trailer has also showed that Uhura and Kirk may go on an adventure together. So Paul Wesley as Kirk is going to show up a lot this season, and I wouldn't be surprised if he shows up in this episode and becomes closer with Uhura. Of course, they will go on to become great friends on the Enterprise once James Kirk takes over as captain. But the next episode, episode 7, is the one that probably everybody's going to be talking about, and this episode is titled Those Old Scientists. This one is almost definitely going to be the Lower Decks crossover that I discussed earlier. The first season of Lower Decks, the character Commander Ransom refers to James Kirk and Scotty as those old scientists. Those old scientists abbreviates to TOS, which is also the acronym for the original series. So obviously this is going to be the one where the Lower Decks crew visits the crew of the Enterprise. We don't know anything really about the plot. All we really know is that the two characters from the animated series are coming to the live action series. There was also something from Anson Mount, who plays Captain Pike. He said that he saw himself in animated form. So we may see some characters from Strange New Worlds also show up on Lower Decks, or we may just see them briefly in animated form during this episode, maybe before or after Boimler and Mariner are returned to their correct timeline and medium. Another thing that was released to the public by somebody working on this episode was the director, Jonathan Frakes. He will be directing this episode. I know that he's directed episodes of every series since he started on the Next Generation as Commander Riker, and he's usually right on with his episodes. He looks to be an actor's director. So I'm really excited for this episode. I kind of believe that this episode may be a breakout episode for Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks. I'm going to talk about the popularity of Star Trek in a little bit, but so far, I think Star Trek Strange New Worlds is critically acclaimed and popular with critics, but it's not as popular in the zeitgeist in the, normal TV watching world as Paramount believes that it deserves to be, and probably many fans do as well. So an episode like this may give a lot of exposure to the show as well as Lower Decks. That show, again, I like that show a lot. I think critics like Lower Decks a lot, and that hasn't really broke out either. It's an animated series, so that is always going to be harder to break out. Most Star Trek fans aren't the kind of fans that also watch adult-themed animated series, so that's got a higher hill to climb. But I think that really an event like this will kind of push Strange New Worlds into the conversation that everybody's having about, what's going on TV, what's cool, what's new to see. And I think you're going to see a lot of people tune in for this. And I hope that it's a very popular chapter in the history of Strange New World and Star Trek. So that will be the 7th episode of the 10-episode season. Episode 8 is reportedly titled Under the Cloak of War. Now, this tells me that this is either a Romulan or a Klingon-based episode. We saw in the trailer for season 2 that there are going to be Klingons during this season, and they look, I think, very similar to the Next Generation era of Klingon. The shading looks to be a little light, so maybe this is the era of Klingons that are moving into where they look more human. If you know the history of Klingons in Star Trek, in canon, they created a reason why the Klingons look like human beings during the original series. Obviously, in real life, it was because we didn't have the makeup to create Klingons back when the original series was airing. But in the canon of Star Trek, it's because of an augment virus that was created during the time of Star Trek Enterprise, during the NX-01 Enterprise days. And then it was given to the Klingons. And then over time, I think a whole generation of Klingons looked more human, and then it was bred out of the species. So now we may be seeing what the Klingons look like while they're transitioning from the Klingons that were real Klingons before the NX-01 Enterprise and the Klingons that we see on the original series. Or they may change that a little bit because it is, even for Star Trek and sci-fi, it is very far-fetched. I think that this will probably be the Klingon episode because under the cloak of war, you've got war, you've got cloak. Of course, Klingons use a cloaking device. Romulans do too, so Romulans could be involved in this episode. Remember, at this point in Star Trek's history, Starfleet does not know what the Romulans look like. The episode Balance of Terror during the original series showed us what Romulans look like, and everybody was surprised that they looked like Vulcans. So we can't have that reveal during Strange New Worlds because they have to save that for the original series. So if they do have Romulans, we're not going to see the Enterprise interact with them because nobody can see what a Romulan looks like. So if I was Strange New Worlds, I might not just even use the Romulans. They're already using the Gorn, and I'm going to get into them in a little bit. And the Gorn's first contact with Starfleet was supposed to be during the original series era. So you're spinning a lot of plates here if you're using the Gorn and the Romulans, and what are you going to use the Borg now too? Another species that Starfleet isn't supposed to make first contact with yet. I think that this will be a Klingon episode under the cloak of war, and we will get an update on what the Klingons are doing during this time in the history of Star Trek. And then episode 9, I think, will be a really interesting episode. The title is Subspace Rhapsody. Now, there are some rumors that Star Trek will be producing and releasing their first musical episode this season. Many popular series have done musical episodes before. For some reason, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the only one that comes to mind, but I know that there have been a lot of other ones. And now again, I have to stress that this is not confirmed, but there are rumors that there will be a musical episode this season. And if there is, it's got to be this one. And even Anson Mount sort of told fans that this is what we were getting. So he was just asked about the crossover episode with Lower Decks, and this is what he had to say. That's not even the craziest thing that we did. There's one episode I'm thinking of towards the end of the season. Remember, this is episode 9, and you'll know it when you see it, where it required us to work many weekends. But we were so excited about it it was not laborious. We were excited to show up for Sunday rehearsals and all the things we are having to do to pull together this one episode. We're really excited about it. There are a lot of really accomplished stage actors in the cast of Strange New Worlds as well. I know that Celia Rose Gooding in particular is a very accomplished stage actress and has won many awards, so I'm sure she's going to be front and center during this episode. Star Trek Strange New Worlds has already shown that they can kind of go off script a little bit, with that episode where they were all, in a fantasy land. They can do weird, strange things and it be okay because this is kind of a weird, strange show. And I love that about this series. And maybe the crew will be under some kind of virus or they'll be transported to some kind of dimension or something like that. I'm sure they'll figure out some way to do it that's very sci-fi, but I'm pretty sure that episode 9 will be Star Trek's first musical episode. And then the season finale of Star Trek Strange New Worlds is reportedly titled Hegemony. And that means that this has to do with the Gorn, because the Gorn government in the canon of Star Trek is called the Gorn Hegemony. If you remember in the first season, we saw the Gorn a couple of times, I believe, in one episode in particular where they were getting born out of people. It was kind of like people were comparing it to the Alien series, but we only saw baby Gorn. We haven't seen a full-size Gorn yet. First contact with the Gorn happens during the original series era. That is when Kirk faces off with a Gorn in the episode The Arena, which is famous or infamous or however you want to call it, because it's kind of silly the way they made the Gorn. And it seems like Strange New Worlds is trying to make the Gorn very, very vicious. And now they are the main villain that the Enterprise will be facing during their run on Strange New Worlds, which I think is really interesting. To me, it reminds me of how Deep Space Nine saved the Ferengi. If you remember, the Ferengi were introduced during the Next Generation, and they were designed to be the main villains for that crew, but they were not received well. People were laughing at them more than being scared of them, and they were kind of just written off as like a funny villain. Then comes along Deep Space Nine and Armin Shimmerman, and they just redefined really what the Ferengi were and made them a really complicated and I think important part of Star Trek. I know that some Star Trek purists say that they're very not Gene Roddenberry because they're capitalists and things like that. But I think that you need those perspectives in a larger narrative like Star Trek, because if Star Trek was just the original series, I think it's okay for Gene Roddenberry's, mission. You know what I mean? But once Star Trek grew into something bigger, then it's not just one person's visions. It's many people's visions. It's all, every creator that's worked on Star Trek. So having said that, I think that having Deep Space Nine take the Ferengi and make them a better villain was really smart and was phenomenal. And I think that the creators and writers on Strange New Worlds are trying to do the same thing with the Gorn, because as I mentioned, the Gorn are just kind of the Gorn are a joke, that big suit moving around, and then the Gorn were basically not seen again since the original series episode because of how that episode went. Nobody wanted to touch that. It looks like Strange New Worlds is trying to make them more vicious, and I'm really here for that. And I really think it's interesting how they're using the Gorn, because again, they have to not make first contact with them and they're still using them. That is quite a tightrope to walk. And I'm really interested to see how they're going to be able to use the Gorn without making first contact with them. So I'm really psyched for this episode. I'm excited for this season. What do you think after hearing these 10 episode titles? Are you more excited for any one episode? Like I said, my most excited episode, I'm really excited for 10, for 9, for 7. I'm excited to see the Klingons in episode 8. I'm excited to see the time travel episode in episode 3. And I'm excited to see what happened to number 1 in episode 1. So I am really excited for season 2 and can't wait to see it. I'm also excited to see season 3, but it looks like I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer than I'd like to, because season 3 of Strange New Worlds has unfortunately been indefinitely delayed by the writer's strike. If you're wondering why, because we first heard that season 3 was going to start filming in May. You may not know this, but in June, there is another strike looming. Now, right now, we have the writer's strike, which means that no writers are working on any projects, but studios can still film projects that have already been written. in the end of June, there's also going to be a strike concerning the actors and the Directors Guild. So with the writers and actors and directors out, you can't film anything. So I believe that Paramount just said, you know what, we're not just going to start filming in May and then have everybody go on strike in June and only get, 1, 2, maybe 3 episodes in the can before we have to come back and match everything up and spend money on that. So they probably just said, we're just going to nix it and then come back and start it once the writer strike is over, which I think is probably the smart thing to do. I know that a lot of productions were affected by COVID when they had to stop, abruptly and then come back. And obviously actors look different. They had to match stuff up. If you have a young actor, then forget about it because now they look completely different. So I believe that that's what they decided to do with the 3rd season of Strange New Worlds. They just said, we're just going to pause filming right now. We're not going to start yet. And we're going to wait until the strikes are over. So we thought that we were going to see season 3 of Strange New Worlds probably around the same time in 2024. Depending on how long the strike takes, though, we might not get any new Strange New Worlds until maybe 2025 now, which is really sad. So let's really appreciate those 10 episodes of season 2 when they come, because it might be close to a year and a half before we get new Strange New Worlds, which is sad. But let me know, what do you think about this news about Strange New Worlds, and how excited are you for the new season? So now let's briefly touch on the other projects in the can for Star Trek. We have the upcoming 4th season of Star Trek Lower Decks, which should be the next series released. That show is done. The writer's strike, nothing affects that. And actually, all these strikes don't affect animated series at all. So the writer's strike, the director's strike, the actor's strike, they don't affect animated series like Lower Decks and Prodigy. However, because Tawny Newsome is a writer and works on Lower Decks, I'm not sure if it affects her status at all. I know that she's already been seen on the picket lines for the writer's strike, so I'm not sure if that will affect her status for the filming of the 5th season of Lower Decks. Of course, they just do voice work. They don't actually film, but I'm not sure exactly where that's at. But as far as season 4 goes, that is for sure coming out. It's coming out in 2023. They said late summer, so I'm guessing August. I mean, summer doesn't go very much farther than August. So I'm guessing that we will see the first episode of season 4 of Lower Decks in August, and probably a trailer in July. I could see them releasing the trailer right around the time that we get the crossover episode with Strange New Worlds and everybody's talking about Lower Decks. Good idea to release that trailer for the upcoming season 2. So look out for that trailer from Lower Decks. That's probably going to be the next trailer we see released by Star Trek. Then after Lower Decks, we have Star Trek Prodigy. Now, we're going to get the 2nd season of that released in the winter of 2023. No definite release yet, but probably in December. This series is very interesting because right now, Star Trek Prodigy is definitely on the bubble. I kind of think that they don't know what to do with Star Trek Prodigy. I think originally it was designed to just get kids, and it seemed like in the second half of the 1st season, the tonal shift was towards getting a more adult audience and trying to get both types of audiences. That's just my opinion. I could be wrong. So it'll be interesting to see if season 2 leans more on the nostalgia or leads more on the hijinks that kids like to see. But this is a series that I think could actually be saved by the writer's strike. I just mentioned that animated series are not affected by the writer's strike or the director's strike or the Screen Actors Guild strike. So if Paramount doesn't have any new Star Trek on tap and they have no way to get any new Star Trek, they might say, hey, let's go ahead and do a 3rd season of Prodigy because we can get all those people back and we can release something instead of having nothing in 2024. If this strike goes long and if it looks like it's going to go past the summer and maybe even into the winter, Paramount may say, hey, we might not have any Star Trek released in 2024 besides Discovery, which I'm going to talk about in a second, and Star Trek Prodigy. So Star Trek Prodigy may actually get renewed for a season 3 if the writer's strike goes many, many months. So it's kind of interesting because most series are affected negatively by the writer's strike. Animated series are one genre that is actually going to be affected positively by this writer's strike. So it's really interesting how this environment is kind of like symbiotic with each other. I've been kind of vocal about my opinion about Prodigy. I'm not a huge fan. Again, I'm not sure who the show's made for, but it doesn't seem like it is made for me. But it does have some fans out there, and I am looking forward to season 2 and hoping that the show does get a little better and I enjoy it more. Now, the next series after Prodigy will be the final season of Star Trek Discovery, the 5th season. I believe that they're still doing reshoots right now, and they're probably trying to finish the reshoots by the end of June with that actors strike on the horizon. The last thing they want to do is be doing reshoots for their final season and not be finished and then have a strike happen, and you've got like 5-10 minutes of story to film and you have no actors on set to do it. So I am sure that they are just doing everything they possibly can to finish this season out before that strike happens at the end of June. So I'm sure that we will hear something from Paramount about the end of their filming rather quickly. I know that we haven't seen any actors show up at any conventions lately, so that's usually a sign that they are filming. Once you start seeing, Anthony Rapp and people like that showing up at conventions, then you know that Discovery isn't filming anymore. But that still looks to be releasing at the beginning of 2024. Even though the writer's strike has happened, it's probably not going to affect Star Trek Discovery's final season unless they can't get these reshoots done. You can film a whole season in 6 months. So depending on how much they want it to do, I'm sure they'll be done in time by the end of June. And then the 2 new projects that we know are coming, these are the ones that are delayed the most by the strike. So the first one is Star Trek Starfleet Academy. That has been delayed indefinitely because of the writer's strike. That show was just at the stage of having a writer's room. They had just hired the writers to work in a writer's room. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it's usually 6 to 12 writers that work together to create maybe one cohesive kind of plot line that kind of gets touched on, but basically they each write their own episodes and write their own stories and stuff like that without contradicting anybody else. Because of the writer's strike, it doesn't look like we're going to see Star Trek Starfleet Academy in 2024, possibly not until 2025. Originally, they said they were going to try and go into production in early 2024. That's not going to happen without any scripts and without a cast. So that one has definitely been put on the back burner until the writer's strike has been solved. I know I'm talking about the strike a lot. If you're not familiar with it, I did do an in-depth video into all the aspects of it, what the writers were looking for, what the producers were looking for. I will link that video here and in the video description if you would like to check it out. It is a very interesting video, and I do recommend that you check it out after listening to this podcast. So next, there's Star Trek Section 31, which will be a film released directly to Paramount Plus starring Michelle Yeoh. This is kind of in the same boat as Starfleet Academy. It was said that I think all the way back to 2019, there were scripts written for a Section 31 series, but that series never got greenlit, and I'm not sure that that story is the same one that's going to be told in this film. I mean, it's already a new format. They would have to hire the same writers back. I'm not sure they're going to do that. They may have scripts, they may not have scripts, but again, with that actors strike and directors strike on the horizon, they're probably not going to try and film a whole film in 4 weeks. I don't think, especially a sci-fi film that you have effects and you have to hit marks and all this kind of thing, you're not going to try and do that in a truncated amount of time. Shazad Latif, who played Ash Tyler / Voq on Star Trek Discovery and then joins Section 31, he is promoting a movie that he is starring in right now. And on his tour, they asked him about this Section 31 film. And he said that he had not been contacted by Paramount and that he'd love to return, but he didn't know if it would work into his schedule. And he has actually been really busy since he left Discovery. He's about to star in a film for Disney Plus called Captain Nemo, where he plays the title character. That's a pretty good gig, if you ask me. So he's very busy. So I don't even know if they'd be able to get him back. But I'm under the impression that they're not going to really use anybody from Discovery except for Michelle Yeoh, because I don't think that Paramount wants the audience to have had watched 3 seasons of Discovery just to enjoy Star Trek Section 31. Discovery wasn't that popular, or isn't that popular, I should say. I don't think that they're going to want to produce something that says, well, you have to watch these 12, 15 episodes in order to understand what's going on in this film. When the film is released, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see the moment Giorgio, comes out of the other side of the Guardian of Forever. I believe that in the film, we're going to already see her doing whatever she's doing with Section 31, and we're going to get some kind of exposition or a flashback as to what happened with her character after meeting with the Guardian of Forever. Kind of like if you remember in Lord of the Rings, Gandalf, when he was supposedly killed at the end of the first movie. And in the second movie, he comes back and tells everybody, I was battling the Balrog and I smote his ruin on a mountaintop. And now he's a new character. I think that we're going to get something like that in Section 31. And by the way, that line from Lord of the Rings, I smote his ruin on the mountaintop, that's like one of my favorite lines in everything. I mean, even to this day, when I'm like pitted up against somebody and I have to, beat them or something and I win, in my head, I hear Ian McKellen say, I smote his ruin on the mountaintop. I just think that's an amazing line. But anyway, so yeah, I don't think that we're going to see the return of any characters from Discovery in Section 31, except for Michelle Yeoh and possibly maybe a cameo by Michael Burnham at some point. I think that would be kind of cool. But I think that mostly it will be a Philippa Georgiou film, and I'm very much looking forward to it. But like I said, because of the writer's strike and the 2 other strikes on the horizon, we probably are not going to see it till 2025. So let me know, what do you think about Starfleet Academy and Section 31? Are you psyched for these 2 series? Are you only psyched for one? I honestly am more psyched for Section 31, but am going to watch both for sure and keep an open mind. But I will have to wait, it seems, a long time to see either of these projects. But let me know in the comments, which of these projects are you looking forward to most? And then finally, I want to talk about Star Trek Legacy, which is the series that Terry Matalas, the showrunner of Star Trek Picard, has pitched as a continuation for the surviving characters from the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard. Now, an interesting bit of news was released last week about Star Trek Picard's 3rd season, and that is that it once again snuck into the top 10 most watched series from the Nielsen rankings. I talked about this in one of my earlier podcasts about how the Nielsen rankings are still around apparently, and they still rate the top 10 most watched series. And Star Trek actually broke in already during the week of the 6th episode. And now it seems that they broke in a total of 3 times. So the week of the 6th episode, the week of the 9th episode, and the week of the final 10th episode of Star Trek Picard Season 3, they were in the top 10 most watched series. This is the 2nd series in all of Paramount Plus to ever appear in this ranking. So that's a pretty big deal. I think either Yellowstone or 1929 or something, they had 1 episode appear in the top 10. But besides that, Paramount Plus has never had anything besides Star Trek Picard Season 3 show up in the top 10. So I think that's a very big deal. Does it necessarily help Star Trek Legacy? I'm not quite sure, and I'll talk about that, but it definitely doesn't hurt it. Also, in regards to Star Trek Legacy, the online petition that I've been talking about has passed 50,000 signatures. This petition is made by fans to get a new series made based on the characters from Star Trek Picard Season 3. There was a similar petition created after the 2nd season of Star Trek Discovery to create a show based on the characters Christopher Pike, Spock, and Number 1, played by Anson Mount, Ethan Peck, and Rebecca Romijn, into a new series, which eventually became Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Now, if you're thinking, well, that petition had 30,000 signatures and it got made, this petition has 50,000 signatures, almost twice 30,000. That's definitely going to get made, right? No, I don't think this means as much as you may think it does, mainly because I think when Captain Pike and Spock and Number 1 were introduced during the 2nd season of Star Trek Discovery, there was already a plan for possibly creating a series with those characters. I don't think that there was ever a plan to create a series with the characters from the 3rd season of Star Trek Picard. So again, I think it's a tall climb for Star Trek Legacy. I have said this before, while I am a fan of those characters, I would like to see them as part of an anthology series. I don't think that it works as a 10-episode open season. It would be interesting to see these characters go on an adventure like an event film, but just open-ended, I don't think it works. But I do think Star Trek Legacy as an anthology series and having these characters interact and going on separate adventures together, I think would work. But just having an open-ended Star Trek Legacy series, I don't think does work. But let me know, what do you think of Star Trek Legacy? Is that a show that you want to see? Are you surprised that it has passed 50,000 signatures? Do you think the fact that Star Trek Picard was so popular is a sign that Star Trek Legacy would be popular. See, I don't. I think that Star Trek Picard was popular because of the characters from the Next Generation that won't be involved with Star Trek Legacy. So kind of you're taking the thing that was popular out of the popular thing and, passing it off. It's kind of like one of those spin-offs like Joey. You're taking all the Friends out of Friends. I don't want Joey. I want something good. And it doesn't look like Star Trek Legacy would be any more than just Joey. But let me know, what do you think of the idea of Star Trek Legacy? And then just a couple other stories that I want to end with. One thing I talked about last week in a video and not in my podcast was a new movie for Babylon 5. I know that I've talked about Babylon 5 quite a bit on this channel before. I'm a big fan of Babylon 5, and I've been following a story about them creating new content since last year. There were rumors about a reboot series. There were rumors about a film, and it looks like one of those things is happening. And we are getting an animated film released in 2023. It's already done. It's already created, and we will see a trailer soon. I did do a video just on this story because I didn't have time for a full podcast that I will link here and in the description if you want to check it out. We have not heard anything new since I released my video last week. So if you want to know about a new Babylon 5 movie, definitely check out that video. It's only about 8 minutes long, so it's not like a whole podcast. It's pretty short, but it is very interesting, and I have a lot of details there about who's coming back and what they're doing with the characters that can't return because the actors that played them have passed away. But definitely, if you're a Babylon 5 fan, check out that video and learn about this upcoming new film from the creator of Babylon 5. And then finally, here's a story I want to follow up on because I did talk about this a few podcasts ago, and it looks like Disney Plus is going to absorb the streaming service Hulu, and soon Hulu will be no more. Now, earlier this year, I talked about that many streaming services will be doing this, and possibly this will also mean the end for Paramount Plus. If you want to watch that video, it's also in the description, so check that out. But it looks like Hulu will be another casualty of the streaming services condensing down because I believe, and I'm sure a lot of other people believe, that there are just too many streaming services. It's impossible even for me to remember which streaming services I'm subscribed to. And then you subscribe to one of those free trials and you forget because you don't know. And I don't know how many times I've done that. So I could be subscribed to anywhere from 3 to a dozen streaming services right now. I really have no idea. So they're helping us out, and a lot of these streaming services are going away. I mean, Showtime already combined with Paramount just recently, and Discovery just combined with HBO Max, and they're now going to be called Max, which was a really smart idea. Take the thing that's unique out of your name and just make it very general. Like, what? I don't know if that's another, I guess that's another podcast, but not a fan of changing HBO Max to Max. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But anyway, it looks like Hulu will be gone soon, and very soon you will see content from Hulu being moved over to Disney Plus. Now, there is a business reason for that. You may not know that Disney owns 2/3 of Hulu. They don't own Hulu outright. They bought out Fox's shares when they bought Fox, but Hulu was always a conglomerate with Comcast, which is also NBC Universal. So they have their own stuff, and they own 1/3 of Hulu, and Disney owns the other 2/3. There's a stipulation in their deal that if Comcast wants to sell their share of Hulu to Disney, Disney has to buy it. So right now, it looks like Disney could owe Comcast $9 billion with a B dollars for buying out Hulu, which I'm not even sure it's worth it. But if Comcast wants to do that, it's their right to do it. So it looks like they are going to do that, and that there will be no more Hulu, possibly by even the end of 2023, which is really weird. It's like the end of an era. I think that Hulu and Netflix were the two first popular streaming services, and they kind of set the market. And now it looks like they're getting bought out by Disney, which is good for them. I'm sure somebody made a lot of money on that deal, but it does look like Hulu is going away. So if you're a fan of Hulu, you're going to find a lot of that content now on Disney Plus. So hopefully they will transfer your membership over to Disney Plus. I probably have both already. But most predictors say that within a few years, there's probably going to be 4 or less. So if you imagine where we were at one point to condense down to 4 or less, I'm fine with that. I have no problem with somebody getting more of a monopoly of this content and making it so there's less streaming services because there's just too many and they're impossible to keep track of. So say goodbye to Hulu. If you like Hulu, make sure that you have a subscription to Disney Plus because all your content will soon be on Disney Plus. But let me know, what do you think of this move? Are you a fan of Disney Plus or Hulu? I know that the Orville has seen some success there, so it'll be interesting to see with this move what happens. But let me know, what do you think of this move and what other streaming services would you like to see fall away in the coming years? Well, that's all I have this week. Thank you very much for joining me. Remember, the best way to support my work is to hit the like button and make sure that you are subscribed for future videos. My name is Eric, and I will see you next time on What Did I Miss?